You're listening to the Curio-city Collective podcast.
I'm Arpita.
And I'm Deepika.
So both Sadhana and Kobita knew the park well, so we did some big spots in the park. Like there was the Cannonball, what they call the Cannonball Valley, which is basically a row of cannonball trees, and that was a time when cannonball was in bloom. So we walked there and we sat. Then there is a space where there are lots of temple trees. So we walked around.
This is Srinidhi, 1/3 of TCC, who prefers working behind the scenes and is the technical and practical head in our mix of three.
And I see that she's been telling you about her forays into the parks and gardens of Hyderabad.
Yeah, like all of us, Nidhi too was indoors a lot through the pandemic period, and the moments of respite were the walks and outings to nearby parks. But this was a special walk that she's describing here.
The one with the Hyderabad Tree Enthusiasts group, right? I remember she was really excited to have found them, and every once in a while she'd share a photo of these beautiful flowering trees with us.
Yeah, and I think from all that we heard of them, it just made absolute sense to try and organize a chat with them.
So who are the them? Who are the people behind the Hyderabad Tree group?
Well, they're two amazing women. The first is Sadhana.
Okay, I'm Sadhana Ramchander. So I am basically an editor. I have my own consultancy called Blue Pencil Info Design, and I work on books. Okay, so what we do is to edit, design and handle coordination of printing. So that's basically what we do for dal roti, whatever. But I'm very interested in nature, have always been interested. And this interest, became a passion. And I started more and more wandering in nature when I could. Like after one stage in life when my children grew up, that's when I could do it. Otherwise, I was busy with all the usual stuff in life.
And curating these walks alongside Sadhana is Kobita.
So I'm Kobita Das Kolli, basically a student of botany and plant sciences, but an amateur naturalist by passion. I also did a stint in between designing watches, so I think, attention to detail and looking close for patterns and, getting inspired by nature. All of this, I think, perhaps, played a role in, making me that much more interested in what is around me.
Sadhana and Kobita, got it.
Because of the pandemic, we ended up doing most of our chats with our guests on Zoom, but with this conversation, we kind of got lucky.
So you mean Nidhi actually had a chance to meet them and talk to them in person? It's odd now. That seems like such a novel idea now.
I know what you mean. Learning to re-socialize post the lockdowns and social distancing has been a task in itself. And so she got a chance to actually do a real meet and greet kind of chat. And the best part was that it was at Indira Park, which is a beautiful public park, which the tree group also frequents. And clearly both Kobita and Sadhana know it pretty well. And Nidhi shared this bit where Kobita was telling her about the value of old or even dead trees that they spotted around.
Like the old trees, which you can see even around you here in Indira Park. Many of them have lost their the tops, and they kind of gnarled and misshapen, and few branches, but they still house a lot of wildlife. It's amazing. So that's one of the most surprising things for us, especially who have not considered, we're not arborists or things like that. So, we've not thought of these things, that the life of the tree doesn't end with when it loses most of its branches and is looking too old and perhaps ready to die, but actually there's so much life going on around it. And we ought to consider that before we think about, trimming it or removing it.
I also love this bit from the chat with Sadhana where she's showing Nidhi the calabash tree or the beggar's bowl tree in Indira Park and sharing the excitement of discovering it for the first time.
One of our walks we came here, suddenly saw these flowers. Oh my God, that was such a lovely discovery. And now every day I walk past it and I see whether they have flowers or not. So this kind of a thing where the flowers grow on the trunk is called cauliflowery. Okay. Like jackfruit. How the fruit comes on the trunk, no? So this is one of the amazing things in nature.
How lovely to have been able to do this in person and just both these nuggets of information. I bet Nidhi is not going to forget the concept of cauliflower in a hurry now after that beautiful introduction. There's something to learning while actually seeing and touching and feeling that's so different from sitting in a classroom.
Yeah, experiential learning or learning by doing allows one to engage fully, intellectually, creatively, emotionally, socially, and even physically. It's a full-bodied participation in the process of learning. Something one definitely appreciates much more after being confined and isolated for so long thanks to the pandemic, and I think especially for children. And you know what's really interesting is that when Nidhi asked Sadhana about tracing how and where the idea of the Hyderabad Tree Group came from, it turned out that it was from a school learning space, Vidyaranya, the school where her daughter was studying.
My children were studying in Vidyaranya, and one day I went to the principal, Shanta Rameshwara, and I said, why don't you introduce a gardening class? Start a gardening class in the school, because children in cities really don't know how a seed sprouts into a plant. They would have never seen it. And so Shanta Rameshwara was a very unique person. And so she said, why don't you start the class yourself? Then I said, okay, let me take it as a challenge. And I took that and I said, fine, I'll start it. And really, without knowing how I'm going to do it, I started for class 4. Because my daughter was in class 4 at that time. That's simple reason. And so what happened was, it slowly took off. The first year we just did 7 classes, once a week. And we made them grow some small, coriander and methi and some flowering plants. Hollyhocks we had grown at that time.
Was Kobita also part of this? How did the two of them meet?
As it turned out, Kobita's daughter was also studying in the same school, and the two got a chance to meet there.
And then I was telling her that, we done a gardening class last year with a group of parents. Now those parents are not interested in doing it with me. I'm looking for someone to do it with. And she said, I love nature and I would love to do this with you. So this was way back in 2002. So then we became a team. And we discovered that, she is very interested, I'm very interested. And we started doing the classes. And it was a lot of fun, and it was an evolving thing. We kind of made the whole syllabus ourselves. And many children loved it. And they used to love the gardening class. It was always outdoors, and we slowly added so many components to it. It was a lot of fun. So then many people started telling us that it's something that makes a big difference. Even parents started telling us. And so that was really the first step.
I can't help but notice that while these might have been the first step in terms of their larger classroom and community engagement, both of them sound like they've carried a love for the natural world all their lives. And Kobita seems to have even pursued it in her education.
That does seem to be the case, doesn't it? And Kobita shared how being an only child, she spent a lot of time outdoors by herself, pottering about, as she put it, and pulled out all these lovely, warm images of a childhood spent with trees.
My first memory, I think, was of a seamal. It was a giant silk cotton in school, in our car parking area. And every spring when it burst into bloom, I think more than admiring the blooms at the top of the tree, because it was such a huge tree, I would look down and find those sepal cups. And I used to love those. I used to collect ever so many of them. The satiny hairs, the shine of it. I think that was an enduring memory for me. And I think I used to do that every year on year. And then I also remember the Malsari, the Bakula. There was one grand old tree in my uncle's garden, and I remember spending mornings collecting the flowers off the ground and stringing them up, and even the Parijat, Nyctanthus. I used to love the perfume and play with those flowers as well.
How very lovely. Was it the same with Sadhana?
Yes, I think she also shares a rich heritage of a childhood full of trees.
When we were children, there were trees everywhere. There were definitely many more trees than there are now. So I grew up in Warangal, and we had an old house. And I guess, it's the memory of my grandmother feeding me under a creeper, jasmine creeper. It's called jaji in Telugu. Under that. And in our backyard, we had a huge tamarind tree on which a lot of monkeys used to come.
There were just more trees around, even in our childhoods. And as a child, I remember outside my window were these two amalthas trees. And drawing the curtains in the morning, the world would just be awash in these bright yellow flowers, dripping and tripping over themselves, so giddy and gleeful. And that transformation from no flowers to a blooming tree would occur so quietly, almost as if, it wanted to make a statement.
Amalthas really is a gorgeous tree. But in quite a contrast to your bright sort of yellow moment, the memory that flits across my mind is rather, I think, solemn from my stay as a child in Karwar, a coastal town near Goa. I remember watching the silhouette of silver oaks and casuarina trees in the night from my window and listening to the wind swoosh through them and just feeling really grateful for their presence because they were a barrier between my house and the endless, enormous ocean that lay beyond. I think I felt protected by them.
It seems like a challenge now to not have a fond memory of some sort related to trees, and I think especially from one's childhood. I hope that remains true for the kids in the future too. And, but tell me, how did the gardening experiment with the children inspire the tree walks?
I remembered how from our last year's chat with S. Vishwanath, the rainwater harvesting expert who follows Zen philosophy, that he often shared how much of what he was doing arrived rather serendipitously at his door. And as Kobita explained how they came to do the walks, I couldn't help think how often this is true in our lives.
So while Sadhana and me were busy doing our school activities, one of the parents, way later, suggested one day, I think he was a prof in Triple IT, and the surroundings are beautiful because it was a part of Central University. And he suggested, why don't we come and do a tree walk for the students there? And we agreed. We went on a Sunday morning. Professors and their children, actually, and their families showed up. Mm-hmm. And it was actually a wonderful walk. Sadhana and me also learnt a lot at that point, because I think for ever so long we were focused on ornamental trees rather than, wild. And then, suddenly we realized that, oh my goodness, there's so much more, right? And why not? And the beauty is that in Hyderabad, you do come across a lot of these wild species, even in parks. So that was the beginning of, a tree walk.
And from then on, they were both invited by schools or colleges or other such spaces, and they would do these tree walks for those select groups.
So when did it take on the shape that it has now?
I think both of them traced it back to around 2016 when Sadhana was participating in the Hyderabad Literary Fest.
Sadhana was part of the organizing committee for the Hyderabad Literary Festival. She was walking around the Hyderabad public school premises and found that, they have some fabulous old trees, including two very special baobabs. And when the committee was trying to find outdoor activities for, the visitors to the HLF, she suggested, why don't we do a tree walk?
Which they did. There were 2-3 walks that they curated through the 2 days. It was fittingly called From Baobab to Baobab. And these walks turned out to be quite a success.
Hey, but wait, did you say baobab? Isn't that the tree from the book The Little Prince?
When I heard them say that baobabs are found in Hyderabad, I immediately told Nidhi that we have to go visit them when I make my way to Hyderabad next. Because as you know, both of us are absolutely in love with the book The Little Prince.
But didn't you tell me once you found them somewhere in India already?
Yeah, in Indore. It's called Badi Imli there, and I carried back a fruit which still has a prize spot on my table even now. So the idea of visiting more of these trees is always exciting for me. Though I have since discovered that it's also unpoetically called the dead rat tree sometimes because of how the fruit looks. So I am rethinking my table decorations. But anyhow, from those baobab walks, the tree walks took on a life of their own, as Sadhana explains.
So that was actually the starting point for people to know about us. Otherwise, nobody knew. And that was when Shyam Penubolu, one of the people who came for the walk, he started this group. So then he made us admins, and then slowly it started growing. Now we have some almost 200 people on the group. So this is the beginnings of the group.
I see what you mean by the serendipitous nature of the coming into being of this group. Just the deep passion and love for nature that Sadhana and Kobita have has meandered and formed itself into a path that's slowly been finding its own meaning and direction and just collecting fellow travelers as it moves along.
You know, Nidhi asked both of them what motivates them to curate and organize these walks. And even though Nidhi chatted with them separately, their response was almost identical. This was Kobita.
I don't look at it as work at all. I'm so happy doing this. It's just, I don't know, perhaps I'm being selfish because I enjoy this so much that, having others around me and, sharing what we know or, chatting with them, that's just a bonus. I'm just enjoying this so much, So I can be out on my own or I can be with a group of people. But I must say that, it's fabulous being out with people, really, and sharing, all that we know and the way we see and notice things. But I love to be out on my own as well.
And Sadhana said something very similar.
So it's not really, we don't look at it as work. It's just something that we have discovered, and we continue to be excited and we continue to discover new things, which is what we feel that, okay, we'll tell a few others about it. Hopefully that they will also become, resource people, and they will tell a group of people, and so the word will spread. That is what motivates us.
Yeah, their strong sense of discovery and enjoyment is already coming through, and not just in their words, but from their voices, really.
One feels how at the heart of the whole endeavor is this almost ecstatic joy and so much curiosity to know and engage with the world around.
So how do these walks actually work, and is it like the birding walks that Deepa organizes?
Well, not quite. There is more fluidity here, I think, especially as the group is still evolving. I'll let Kobita explain.
At first, we wanted to explore all the parks we had, so the larger parks. So we would, I think we started with Kasu Brahmananda Reddy Park. And we didn't even step into the park. We actually did the outer walkway. And it was absolutely fascinating. It was great. And then slowly, of course, we did Sanjeevaya, and then we did Indira Park. And then Sadhana and me found, we were still teaching in school, and we would take the children for their February walks to a park. And then we suddenly realized, this was the season that we would like people to see. And we did that as well.
And from those spring walks emerged the idea that trees and landscapes were doing different things during different seasons, so why not do more seasonal walks? Both pointed out how it was simultaneously a process of learning for the two guides too, as they figured which venue was the best for which season.
And after that, we've done drives, seasonal or scenic, or we've even been to reserve forests and, generally rambled about, there's no set itinerary.
So what happens once a place and time to meet is selected and shared with the group?
Well, it's simple enough from there. One arrives and the group pulls together and the walk begins.
We just walk in, we start with whichever tree catches our eye, and then after that we just proceed with, whatever catches anyone's eye for that matter. And it could be anything, whether it's tree bark or the flowers or a little shrub or an insect or a bird. So that's how it goes. We try normally to proceed at a fair pace so that we can finish a certain perambulation around the park. But there have been instances, especially when it's just me, that we've done, I think, about maybe 30 to 40 feet in an hour and a half. So I guess it's, how interesting we find it and how enthusiastic everyone else is.
Tree walk seems like a meta idea, and from what Kobita is describing, it seems like the walk is just as much an appreciation club for all that happens in and around the trees as well.
Oh, for sure. Kobita said this too.
I mean, you're looking at a blade of grass, there's an insect, and then there is a dry leaf, there is, a termite hill. There's any number of things happening. It can be very exciting. And then the children add to it as well, you see. So they go off at a tangent, teacher, why don't you look at this, and, something like that. And it just goes off.
Also, she expanded on how there is so much more to the experience than just learning something new. So much of this is also about leaving the everyday busyness and just be for a bit.
From my point of view, it's just, it's sheer enjoyment. It can be absolutely meditative, if you want to say, but it's just a break from the regular humdrum. Take a couple of hours away from that, and your mind is just completely elsewhere. You're looking at something else, you're discussing something else, and you're outdoors. It just makes for a very refreshing experience, and it's kind of rejuvenating. And I think it enhances your senses. And like, D.H. Lawrence says, there's a sixth sense.
Kobita is referring here to D.H. Lawrence calling the sense of wonder our sixth sense.
I think that makes a huge difference, so, and I think it helps in creativity, paying attention. After that, you have this feeling of well-being, of, just a kind of satisfaction at the end of the walk. And then you're all geared to go back and tackle whatever situation you want to. But the laughter, the sharing, I think that also is something else altogether. It's hard to experience those kind of things, exclaiming over, a leaf pattern or, bird hidden in a tree hole. That's something else altogether, you don't come by that sort of experience normally. So I think that's what draws people to the walk.
These are often quoted as advantages of the Japanese practice of shirin-yoku or forest bathing, how it's good for both physical and mental well-being. And this form of park and tree bathing is just now our urban equivalent.
Yeah, it makes sense to make the most of what we've got instead of waiting for 5-day trips to run out of the city once in 6 months. And as word has spread, the group has developed. There are regulars, of course, but also a fair smattering of new people show up and add their hues to the experience.
So, interestingly, in different walks, different people come. It's not the same people. So, there'll be at least a minimum of 10 people who come. Sometimes there are 25 people. So, there are some constants. They always come. And there are some every time new people come. So, it's nice because we also meet different people. And, we get to interact with them. Then somebody will say, hey, I know this farm. It's a great place. Why don't we go there? Then we go and explore that farm.
Speaking of observation, I'm reminded of something Sherlock Holmes says in one of his books. You see, but you do not observe. And as Kobita mentioned, it's not just about the trees. What you're also learning about at a subconscious level is how to bring attention to the spaces and places that we dwell in and pass through on a daily basis.
For sure. We all live in the same kind of urban surroundings that Sadhana and Kobita do, but how many of us can really name even 5 trees from our neighborhood? The way Nidhi described her experience of the walk, they sound really immersive. For an hour or so, you are totally present and giving attention to the world you live within daily, but don't really know. Sadhana put it particularly poignantly in this bit, I thought, where Nidhi spoke to her about being able to recognize and name trees.
Yeah, so I believe that more than learning the name, it's important to open that thing in people's minds that look up. As I called my book, just look up.
Just Look Up to See the Magic in the Trees Around You is a book Sadhana wrote in 2014.
People drive on the roads. There are these rows and rows of beautiful flowering trees. Now you have the tree of gold flowering on the Hyderabad road. They will not see because they're so immersed in their own everyday problems that they will not see them. So my simple thing is just look up. Later on you get curious, you learn, you want to know the name. So I call it like befriending a tree. The tree becomes your friend. And once the tree becomes your friend, you start observing that tree. And for me, the friendship is complete when you observe every stage of the tree. First you will notice it when it flowers. After that, you will see the pods. Then you start seeing the leaves, what it does in different seasons. So once you observe all these things, then really that tree is your friend. You will never miss it.
I fully resonate with that. And this conversation keeps reminding me of The Little Prince. That bit where the fox talks to the prince about taming each other, and how the whole process is bereft of words but full of small, daily, meaningful gestures of attention till one day they become unique to each other.
Yeah, befriending a tree must feel very similar. And later in the book, the prince actually says you become responsible forever for what you have tamed. And it's so strange, but this has already played out with this group in some ways. The repeated protests against the axing of the Chevela banyans, which are a long row of almost 10,000 old trees, many of which are banyans, rich with life. And it's being done for the widening of the National Highway 163.
So our mission is to teach people to appreciate nature, children and adults. That is our mission. So we really didn't want to get into activism. But when we saw the banyans are going to be chopped down to make a road, we thought we have to do something about it. And we were lucky because we had a group of people who were like all out to, go on, protest in a big way for this. So that is how we got into that. And we were successful. I mean, a lot of good things happened and, we really worked very, very hard. Entire summer of, I think, 2018, we worked for this. And our work got noticed. And we actually saw a proof that it was because of these protests that they stopped that. See, it's only when you care for something you want to protect it, right? So if you don't care about trees, you will not notice when somebody is axing it down.
Here Sadhana is speaking of the protest a couple of years back, but the whole thing came up all over again in late 2021 and protests are going on even as we record.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, we've been speaking to people involved in urban ecology across different Indian cities, and this keeps coming up. How a project that seems detrimental to the natural world keeps finding its way back again and again and requiring multiple protests. So I must ask this, just based on what they've been observing, what are their thoughts on how cities are and are not embracing the wild, and in particular their relationship with trees?
Yeah, this was a question Nidhi did put to both of them.
See, I love the city because there are a lot of things happening and, city is very comfortable to live in. But what I feel is that the government should not interfere with whatever nature that already exists. See, Haritaharam is all very fine in Telangana. They are planting more trees. But the existing trees should not be chopped down. Existing wilderness should not be disturbed. This is a very, very important aspect.
It's hard to say. I feel that, most people really don't understand the basic importance of the tree or any of the other plants around us. They're only looking at it from the perspective of what humans get out of it, right? So therein there's one problem there. There's a shortcoming actually there, that viewpoint that, it has to give us something and only then.
Kobita also pointed out that while the tree plantation drives are important, it's equally important to take into consideration the natural vegetation of the region.
Basically, it's a scrub landscape. And there are certain areas where, trees will grow, we will introduce trees and trees will grow well. And there are certain areas that, they won't. Then added to that is the climate, which has changed so much over the past decades that we can see that difference. The trees don't grow as well as they used to. In this scenario, tree planting has become a tokenism, mere tokenism and a numbers game basically, because we're not managing the trees that we have already. And then the tree planting again the species may not be appropriate and the place where they plant is also inappropriate. And the way they do the planting is also inappropriate. So we're not thinking about the tree per se.
And both spoke to how the scrub regions themselves are valuable. We often have a tendency to be dismissive of them, but they're seasonal landscapes that are suited to the climatic geographic niche and hence provide a whole host of ecosystem services that we often don't even recognize.
It's odd how in Indian urban planning we often see this strange preoccupation with the exotic and, trying to turn our cities into Beijing or London, even in terms of the kinds of vegetation they have. Wouldn't it be so much more original and overall more sustainable if we just incorporated what's native to the region?
And this was something Sadhana alluded to with regards to the approach of sanctioning, building and managing parks in the city as well, and why they might need some rethinking too.
Slowly, section by section, they're starting to put outdoor gyms. In one place, they build a yoga shed. So slowly, and then a whole lot of nurseries to cater to Haritaharam. So when they want to put nursery, they will remove all the wild plants and, shrubs and all that and then make a nursery there. These wild plants are very important because you get these beautiful wildflowers and lots of insects thrive on that. So we need all these things for the entire, there's a connection in the whole, the ecosystem is very important. They have to preserve that.
As it happens, I went to Lal Bagh just after listening to this conversation with Sadhana and Kobita. And while I was there, we walked through a section of the park which is full of the aforementioned scrub and grass. Nothing like the otherwise fairly manicured and tended parts of the park. And in this season, it was almost like a field of tall rattlepods lined up with their unfurling yellow flowers. And there were flowering sedges and tall heads of grasses in millions. And these little muddy ponds with algae and lush moss linings. It was just so much life. And at such moments, no one has to tell you the point of a scrub jungle really. It's so self-evident just how vital it is to a rich ecosystem.
Yeah, and the past 2 decades of research and science are telling us what I think most nature lovers instinctively know, that the world around us is really full of its own logic and meaningfulness. Seasonal and ephemeral landscapes play such important roles within ecosystems, and I think it's odd how we can so easily dismiss or forget that.
Yeah, and Kobita added this really important bit about the need for incorporating green in urban planning.
A city has to grow, yes, and urban spaces will change. All that is very well. But we ought to very urgently remember that those pockets of green that we have, or brown, whatever, are fundamental to our well-being. So we have to design our urban areas with those in pockets, like little button forests or things like that, and work around these spaces, not raise them and move, and say that, we've moved the, forest to or we've moved the trees to the, convenient space outside there somewhere. That's not going to help. It's just going to increase the stresses on the city. So for the well-being of the city and its residents, you have to have those spaces within the city, within your habitation.
The other day I came across this quote by Joanna Macy, an environmental activist and author, and that stayed with me and particularly comes back to me now as I think about the Hyderabad Tree Enthusiasts group. Macy says, "If the world is to be healed through human efforts, I'm convinced it will be by ordinary people whose love for this life is even greater than their fear."
And like Sadhana said, we protect what we love, and really there is much that this group can teach us about reconnecting, reimagining, and loving the world that we live in. If you wish to know more about the Hyderabad Tree Enthusiasts group or want to join it, both Sadhana and Kobita can be found on Instagram, or you can write to us and we'll put you in touch. We aren't done with this duo quite yet though. In our Extra with Sadhana, we take quick tips from her on how we can reintroduce urban children to the natural world. So we hope you listen in.
Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast for more episodes. You can follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or a podcast app of your convenience. We're also on YouTube, so look up the channel, The Curio-city Collective, or follow us through our social media pages. And most importantly, if you like what you're hearing, please do share these episodes with your family, friends, and community members. Leave us your thoughts, comments, and feedback. We love hearing from you.
TCC is a not-for-profit initiative that is funded by you, the listeners. If you'd like to support the work that we do at TCC, there are different ways that are listed on the support and contribute page of our website, www.thecurio-citycollective.org. You can also write to us at team@thecuriositycollective.org or message us on 6300711451 if you feel called to make a contribution to sponsor an episode or a podcast series. This could help us with our research, writing, admin, and editing costs to build further resources that speak to our collective well-being. We hope you'll join us on this journey of co-creating the space to nurture and build cities that are healthy and happy. This podcast was created by Srinidhi Raghavan, Deepika Khatri, and Arpita Joshi. The sound editing was